A billionaire was eating dinner alone when a breaking news segment stopped him cold. On the screen, a single mother stood on a frozen sidewalk in Philadelphia, her 2 children clinging to her coat, surrounded by everything they owned. She had just been evicted. It wasn't the woman's tears that froze him. It wasn't her children shivering in the February wind. It wasn't the neighbors watching in silence. It was the address on the screen. Because that building belonged to him. And what he was about to uncover inside his own empire would shatter everything he believed about the man he'd become. 42-year-old Wesley Foster, CEO of Foster Meridian Properties, a real estate empire spanning over 14,000 units worth $2.6 billion, had just watched his own system destroy a family in real time. Wesley Foster's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower on Lakeshore Drive. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped every room, offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan that stretched so far it looked like the edge of the world. The kitchen had Italian marble countertops that had never seen a home-cooked meal. The wine cellar held 230 bottles, each one selected by a sommelier Wesley had met exactly once. The dining table seated 14. In 4 years of living there, not once had every chair been filled. Most nights, only one was. He was 42 years old, CEO of Foster Meridian Properties, a real estate empire spanning 6 major cities, 14,000 rental units, and a portfolio valued at $2.6 billion. His name appeared on Forbes lists. His face appeared at investor conferences. His signature appeared on contracts that determined where thousands of families would live, how much they would pay, and under what conditions they could be removed. But Wesley Foster had never walked the hallway of a building he owned, never stood inside a unit, never met a single tenant, not one. In 20 years of real estate, he had never once looked a renter in the eye and asked if the heat worked, if the locks were safe, if the roof leaked. He didn't need to. That's what systems were for. Every property in the Foster Meridian portfolio was managed by third-party firms. Professional, efficient, distant. Wesley reviewed quarterly reports, revenue per unit, occupancy percentages, operating margins. Tenants were not names in his world. They were numbers on a spreadsheet, line items that either performed or didn't. If they can't pay, they made bad choices. That's not my problem to solve. He said this often. To his board, to his COO, to himself late at night when the penthouse felt too large and too quiet, and the lake outside looked like a black mirror reflecting nothing back. He said it because his father had said it first, and his father had built everything Wesley now stood on. Aldridge Foster. The name still carried weight in Chicago real estate circles 7 years after his death. A man who started with a single building on South Side. A man who turned 12 units into 1,200, then 1,200 into 3,000, all before Wesley graduated college. Aldridge didn't believe in sentiment. He believed in leases. He believed in margins. He believed that the moment you saw a tenant as a person, instead of a contract you had already lost. Sentiment is a luxury landlords can't afford, son. The moment you start feeling sorry for people who can't pay rent, you stop being a businessman and start being a fool. Wesley had carried those words like scripture for 2 decades. Every decision filtered through that lens. Every policy designed to protect the portfolio, not the people inside it. And it had worked spectacularly. The empire had quadrupled since his father's death. Revenue climbed every year. Investors were happy. The board was happy. Wesley told himself he was happy too. But happiness doesn't echo. And that penthouse echoed constantly. He ate dinner alone that February evening. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of Burgundy that cost $90 a bottle. The television was on across the room. Channel 7 News. Wesley wasn't watching. He never really watched. The TV existed the same way the dining table existed to fill space that would otherwise remind him how empty the room actually was. His phone buzzed with emails. Board meeting prep for tomorrow, a zoning dispute in Atlanta, quarterly numbers from the Dallas properties. He scrolled with one hand, ate with the other. Routine. Mechanical. Insulated. Wesley was 14. when his father took him to a building on 63rd Street. It was January, cold enough that breath turned solid the second it left your lips. They walked through the front entrance past a hallway that smelled like mildew and cooking grease up a staircase where the railing wobbled under Wesley's hand. On the second floor, a family was being moved out. A woman stood in the doorway holding a toddler on her hip. Behind her, 2 older children sat on garbage bags stuffed with clothes. The woman was crying, quietly, the kind of crying that happens when you've already screamed and nobody came. Wesley stopped. He looked at his father. "Can't we help them?" he asked. His voice was small. He was 14 and still believed the world worked the way teachers said it did. Aldridge didn't slow down. He put his hand on Wesley's shoulder and kept walking. "You feel sorry," he said. "Good. That means you're human. Now learn to stop. Pity doesn't pay mortgages." She didn't pay rent. That's the end of the story. Wesley looked back over his shoulder. The toddler was chewing on the zipper of a coat that was too thin for winter. The woman's eyes met his for half a second. Then his father's hand tightened and they turned the corner. That moment didn't haunt Wesley. That was the problem. He let it teach him exactly what his father intended. Stop feeling. Start counting. Build walls between yourself and the consequences of your decisions, and never let anyone convince you those walls are wrong. After Aldridge died of a stroke 7 years ago, Wesley didn't grieve by slowing down. He grieved by accelerating. He doubled the portfolio in 3 years, then doubled it again. He hired optimization firms, streamlined operations, automated rent collection, late fees, maintenance requests, and eviction filings. Every process ran through software. Every decision filtered through policy. No exceptions, no conversations, no faces. He contracted Pinnacle Property Group to manage the Philadelphia properties. 47 buildings, over 800 units. Wesley had signed the contract in his Chicago office without ever visiting a single one. He didn't ask how Pinnacle handled late payments, didn't ask about their eviction timeline, didn't ask what happened to families who fell behind. He didn't need to ask. The numbers were good. The margins were healthy. That was the only language he'd been taught to speak. He had built an empire designed to never let him see the people inside it, until the news forced him to look. The image on the screen barely registered at first. Wesley glanced up between bites. A street. Winter. Philadelphia, the ticker said. Some kind of commotion on a sidewalk. He almost looked away, almost went back to his phone. But then the camera shifted. A woman stood on the curb in a thin gray jacket. No hat, no gloves. February in Philadelphia, and she had no gloves. Behind her, piled on the concrete like debris after a storm, was everything she owned. A mattress leaning against a fire hydrant. Black garbage bags splitting at the seams. A laundry basket filled with kitchen things, pots and plastic cups, and a box of cereal tipped on its side. 2 children sat on the pile. A girl, maybe 9, wearing a school backpack, her arms wrapped around her knees. A boy, maybe 5, sitting on a trash bag like it was a chair, looking around with eyes too wide and too calm for what was happening. The reporter's voice cut through the noise. Yolanda Jefferson, a 34-year-old certified nursing assistant, was evicted from her apartment this morning after falling 2 months behind on rent. Jefferson, a single mother of 2, lost her position at a community hospital 4 months ago during budget cuts. She says she contacted her property management company 11 times requesting an extension. None of her calls were returned. Wesley set down his fork. Something in the woman's posture held him. Not collapse, not performance, just stillness. The stillness of someone who had already fought every fight available to her, and lost them all, and was now standing in the wreckage trying to figure out which direction to walk. The camera panned to the building behind her. 5 stories. Brick. Metal fire escapes. A number above the entrance. 1847. Wesley didn't blink. The reporter continued. This building is part of the Foster Meridian portfolio, one of the largest residential real estate holdings in the country, owned by billionaire developer Wesley Foster. His fork hit the plate. The sound of metal on porcelain rang through the penthouse like a bell in an empty church. Wesley stood up, walked toward the television. His legs moved before his brain gave permission. 1847 Kensington Avenue. He opened his laptop, typed the address into the property management database. The screen loaded. Unit 312. Tenant Yolanda Jefferson. Lease start March of 2019. Monthly rent $1,150. Payment history 58 out of 60 months, paid on time. Missed November, missed December. Eviction filed January 14th. Eviction executed February 3rd. From missed payment to homeless. 6 weeks. That's all it took. 6 weeks to erase nearly 5 years of perfect tenancy. 6 weeks to put a mother and 2 children on a frozen sidewalk surrounded by garbage bags. His building, his tenant, his system. His fault. Wesley's hand hovered over the remote. On the screen, the reporter was interviewing a neighbor. But Wesley wasn't listening to the neighbor anymore. He was watching the children. The little girl Kezia, the reporter had called her, stood near her mother with a school backpack still strapped to her shoulders. 9 years old. Old enough to understand that what was happening was wrong. Old enough to feel the shame. She didn't cry. She just stood there, holding her backpack straps like they were the only solid thing left in her world. And the boy. Darnell. 5 years old, sitting on that garbage bag, with his legs dangling, looking up at his mother with a question on his face that the microphone barely caught. "Mama, are we camping?" Wesley's chest cracked open. A 5-year-old boy sitting on the remains of his home, asking if this was an adventure. Because that's what children do. They translate destruction into something they can survive. They build stories around catastrophe because the truth is too large for a body that small. And his mother had let him believe it, had swallowed her terror so completely that her son thought they were on a trip, had held herself together with such ferocious grace that the worst day of her life looked to a 5-year-old like camping. The reporter kept talking. Details piled up like evidence at a trial. Yolanda Jefferson had worked the night shift at a community hospital in North Philadelphia for 5 years. 5 years of 12-hour shifts. 5 years of waking up at 4 in the afternoon, getting her children fed and homework done, dropping them with a neighbor, and walking into a building full of suffering until sunrise. She'd been laid off when the hospital cut its nursing assistant staff by 40%. Budget shortfalls, funding gaps, the kind of language that sounds clean in a boardroom but bleeds on the ground. After losing her job, she'd applied to 47 positions in 4 months. 47. She'd gotten 3 interviews. None of them hired her. The reason was always the same, spoken or unspoken. She needed flexible hours because she had 2 children and no childcare. And in America, needing flexibility as a single mother wasn't a circumstance. It was a disqualification. She'd paid rent on time for 4 years and 10 months. 58 consecutive payments. Never once late. Then November came and the savings ran dry. She called Pinnacle Property Group. Once, twice, 5 times, 11 times total. She left voicemails. She sent emails. She walked into their office on Broad Street and sat in the lobby for 2 hours waiting to speak to someone. Nobody called back. Nobody met with her. Nobody offered a payment plan, a grace period, an extension, or even the dignity of a conversation. The system didn't have a button for compassion. It only had a button for eviction. And someone pressed it. The reporter signed off. The segment ended. The anchor moved on to weather. Wesley reached for the remote. He pressed the power button. The screen went black, but the image didn't disappear. It burned behind his eyes. A woman standing in the cold, a girl gripping her backpack, a boy asking if they were camping, and an address that belonged to him. A child who didn't understand eviction had accidentally named it the kindest thing he could, an adventure, because his mother had never once let him see her terror. Wesley stood in his penthouse. 3 floors, Lake Michigan view, 230 bottles of wine, a dining table for 14 with 1 chair pulled out. And somewhere in Philadelphia, a woman who had done everything right was sleeping on a gym mat tonight because his system had decided that 2 missed payments erased 5 years of proof that she was worth keeping. He picked up his phone. Not to call his lawyer, not to call his publicist, not to call anyone who could make this go away quietly. He called his driver. "Get the car ready. First flight to Philadelphia tomorrow morning." Then he stood at the window, staring at the Black Lake, and for the first time in 20 years, the silence in his penthouse didn't feel like peace. It felt like evidence. Wesley sat at his desk long after the screen went dark. The penthouse was silent except for the low hum of the heating system and the distant sound of wind pressing against glass. He opened his laptop again. Not email this time, not investor reports. He logged into the Foster Meridian Master Database, the system he'd paid $300,000 to build. The system that tracked every unit, every lease, every payment, every filing across 14,000 apartments in 6 cities. He typed the address. 1847 Kensington Avenue. Unit 312. The file loaded. Clean. Organized. Efficient. Just like everything Pinnacle Property Group delivered. Tenant name Yolanda Jefferson. Lease start date March 15, 2019. Monthly rent $1,150. Payment history scrolled down the screen like a heartbeat monitor. Green, 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 green. 58 months of green. On time. Every single one. Then November. Red. December. Red. Eviction filed January 14th. Eviction executed February 3rd. 2 red marks after 58 green ones. That's all it took. Wesley clicked into the case notes. Pinnacle's internal log. 3 lines. Tenant non-responsive to payment reminders. Standard eviction protocol initiated per portfolio guidelines. Unit scheduled for turnover and market rate relisting. Non-responsive. He stared at that word. The reporter on the news had said Yolanda called 11 times. 11 calls. 11 voicemails. A woman walked into their office and sat in the lobby for 2 hours. And the system called her non-responsive. Was it a person who decided not to call back? Was it a policy? Was it a computer that sorted her into a queue that nobody checked? Wesley didn't know. And that was the ugliest part. He didn't know because he had designed his empire so that he would never have to. His father's voice surfaced like it always did, quiet, certain, unmovable. She didn't pay. The system worked. Sentiment is a luxury, son. Wesley heard it. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't nod along. The system had worked. That was the problem. It had worked exactly the way he built it to work. Fast, clean, no exceptions, no conversations, no second chances. A machine that turned human beings into line items and erased them when the numbers stopped performing. The system wasn't broken. The system was functioning perfectly. And it had just put a mother and 2 children on a frozen sidewalk. Wesley closed the laptop. He walked to the window. Lake Michigan stretched out below, black and endless under a winter sky. Somewhere out there, 14,000 doors had his name on the deed. Behind those doors, people were sleeping, cooking, arguing, holding children, worrying about rent, and he had never once considered any of them real. He picked up his phone and called his driver. "I need a flight to Philadelphia. First thing tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. If you can find one." "Should I notify your office, sir?" "No." "Your assistant?" "No. Just the flight." He hung up. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't write a plan. He didn't call his lawyer, or his publicist, or his COO. For 20 years, every decision Wesley made had been filtered through layers of protection, advisors, and contracts and policies designed to keep him safe from the consequences of his own choices. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow, he was going alone. For 20 years, Wesley Foster had built walls between himself and his tenants. Tonight, a news camera had blown a hole through every single one. The flight landed at Philadelphia International at 7:42 the next morning. Wesley had slept maybe 90 minutes. He'd spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, seeing a boy on a garbage bag asking his mother if they were camping. He'd arranged a car, black sedan, tinted windows. He gave the driver the address but told him to stop 2 blocks away. He wanted to walk. He needed to feel the distance between his world and the one he'd been profiting from. The neighborhood announced itself gradually. First, the buildings got shorter. Then the sidewalks got rougher. cracks in the concrete filled with frozen rainwater. A bodega on the corner with a neon sign missing half its letters. A laundromat with bars on the windows. A bus stop bench with the backrest torn off. Wesley walked through it all in a cashmere overcoat that cost $1,200 and Oxford shoes that had never touched a surface rougher than polished marble. He looked like a man who had taken a very wrong turn, and in a way he had. 20 years ago, he saw the building before he reached it. 1847 Kensington Avenue, 5 stories, 48 units. Red brick turned gray from decades of exhaust and neglect. The fire escapes were rusted. 2 windows on the 3rd floor were covered with cardboard and duct tape. The front door was propped open with a cinder block because the lock had been broken so long that nobody bothered reporting it anymore. Wesley stood on the sidewalk and stared at a building he owned. A building that generated $420,000 a year in rental income. A building he had never once visited. He walked inside. The hallway was dark. Not dim, dark. 3 out of 4 overhead lights were dead. The linoleum floor was peeling at the edges. The walls had water stains that spread from the ceiling like bruises. The air smelled like mildew and cooking oil, and something metallic that might have been old pipes. The elevator had an out-of-order sign taped to it. The tape was yellow with age. Wesley took the stairs. The railing wobbled under his grip. On the 2nd floor landing, a roach crossed his path without hurrying. It wasn't scared of him. Nothing in this building was scared of its owner. Nobody here even knew who he was. He knocked on the first door he came to. No answer. He knocked on the second. A chain rattled. The door opened 3 inches. An elderly woman peered through the gap. Dark skin. Silver hair pulled back tight. Eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Can I help you?" she asked. Not friendly, not hostile, just careful. The careful of someone who had learned that strangers in nice coats usually meant trouble. "My name is Wesley," he said. He left off the last name. "I'm looking into conditions in this building. I work with the ownership group." The woman studied him for a long moment. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in then. I got plenty to show you." Her name was Odessa Harmon, 71 years old. She had lived in Unit 204 for 12 years and 3 months. She knew because she counted. She counted everything. Days without heat, weeks without maintenance, months since anyone from management had returned a call. "The heat's been broken 3 weeks, she said, leading him into a living room where a space heater hummed in the corner. 3 weeks in February. I called Pinnacle 6 times. You know what they told me. They said they'd send someone. Nobody came. They just send letters about rent." Wesley looked around the apartment. The ceiling above the kitchen had a brown stain spreading outward like a slow explosion. The faucet dripped into a pot placed beneath it. The window frame had a gap where cold air whistled through, stuffed with a rolled-up towel. This was a unit generating $1,150 a month. This was what that money was buying. Not maintenance, not safety, not dignity, just extraction. "Did you know Yolanda Jefferson?" Wesley asked. "Unit 312. Odessa's expression changed, softened and hardened at the same time. That girl worked harder than anyone in this building. Night shifts, double shifts. Her babies were always clean, always polite, always had their homework done. She used to check on me when she got home in the morning, 6 a.m., and she'd knock on my door just to make sure I was okay." Odessa paused. Her jaw tightened. She didn't deserve what they did to her. None of us do. We pay our rent. We keep our heads down. And they treat us like we're disposable. Like the building matters, but the people inside it don't. Wesley didn't respond. He stood in that dark hallway after leaving Odessa's apartment and pressed his back against the wall. The plaster was cold through his coat. Somewhere above him, a pipe clanked. Somewhere below, a child laughed. 14,000 units. 6 cities. $2.6 billion. And this is what it looked like from the inside. Not a portfolio. Not a spreadsheet. Not a quarterly report. A building where an old woman stuffed towels into window frames to survive the winter. Where a mother who never missed a rent payment got thrown into the cold because a management company decided she wasn't worth a phone call. Wesley Foster had built his empire from the top down. He had never once looked at it from the bottom up, until now. He left the building and drove straight to Pinnacle Property Group's regional office on Market Street. No appointment, no warning. He walked through the front door in his $1,200 coat and asked the receptionist for the regional manager. Gary Whitmore came out 7 minutes later. Mid-50s, thinning hair, a smile that had been trained in customer service seminars. He didn't know why Wesley Foster was standing in his lobby. He didn't know about the newscast. He didn't know about Odessa. He just saw a billionaire client and started sweating. "Mr. Foster, what an unexpected pleasure. If I had known you were coming, I would have." "Show me the eviction process for the Philadelphia properties," Wesley said. No greeting, no small talk, start to finish, every step. Gary blinked. "Of course. Right this way." They sat in a conference room with fluorescent lights and a whiteboard covered in property codes. Gary pulled up the process on his laptop, walked through it like a sales pitch. Rent due on the 1st. Grace period through the 5th. Late fee applied on day 6. $75 per day. Wesley stopped him. $75 a day, industry standard for the region, Mr. Foster. It's within legal limits. Wesley did the math in his head. A tenant who missed 1 month's rent of $1,150 would accumulate $2,250 in late fees within 30 days. That meant, by the time the eviction was filed, the tenant didn't owe 1 month's rent. They owed more than 3 months equivalent. A hole almost impossible to climb out of. "What happens after 30 days of non-payment?" Wesley asked. "We file for eviction, standard protocol. Is there any step between the late fee and the filing? Any outreach? Any call to the tenant?" Gary hesitated. "We send automated notices, text and email. And if the tenant calls you," another pause. "Longer this time. We process over 800 units in this region, Mr. Foster. Our team handles calls as capacity allows. We can't make individual exceptions without compromising operational efficiency. In the United States, more than 3.6 million eviction cases are filed every year. The vast majority of tenants facing eviction don't have a lawyer. Many don't even understand the legal process happening to them until the marshal shows up at their door. And in cities like Philadelphia, where housing courts are overloaded and legal aid is underfunded, the system isn't designed to protect tenants. It's designed to process them quickly, quietly, efficiently. For companies like Pinnacle, eviction isn't a last resort. It's a business tool. Remove a tenant paying below market rate. Renovate the unit with minimal upgrades. Relist it at a higher price. Turnover isn't a failure of the system. It is the system. And the people who own the buildings almost never see it happening. Because they're not supposed to. That's the whole point. "Pull up Yolanda Jefferson's file," Wesley said. Gary typed. The file appeared. He read from the screen like he was reading a parking ticket. Unit 312. Non-payment. November, December. Eviction filed January 14th. Executed February 3rd. Standard protocol. "She paid on time for 4 years and 10 months, Wesley said, his voice flat. 58 consecutive months. She lost her job. She called your office 11 times asking for an extension. Your team never called her back. Not once." Gary shifted in his seat. "Mr. Foster, I understand your concern, but we follow the protocols that were agreed upon in our management contract. The same contract your team approved and signed." There it was. The sentence Wesley had been circling since last night. "The contract your team approved. The protocols your company authorized. The system you paid us to run." Wesley sat in silence for a long moment. Gary watched him, waiting for the explosion that never came. Because Wesley wasn't angry at Gary Whitmore. Gary was doing exactly what he'd been hired to do. Exactly what the contract specified. Exactly what the quarterly review incentivized. "Can't," Gary had said. "We can't make exceptions." But Wesley heard the word differently now. Won't. They won't make exceptions. Because the system rewarded efficiency over empathy. Speed over humanity. Turnover over tenancy. And Wesley had built that system. Signed the contract. approved the terms, cashed the checks. He hadn't just watched an eviction on the news. He had funded it. Wesley left Pinnacle's office without another word. He sat in the back of the sedan for 10 minutes, staring at his phone, before he asked the driver one question. Is there a church shelter on Broad Street? The driver found it in 30 seconds. Grace Covenant Church, emergency family shelter, capacity for 40 beds. Currently housing 60 people. Wesley told the driver to take him there. Then he did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He took off his overcoat, folded it, left it on the seat. He loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves. Not because it would fool anyone. A man in a $1,500 shirt with rolled sleeves still looks like a man in a $1,500 shirt, but because the coat felt like armor, and where he was going armor was the wrong thing to wear. The shelter was in the basement of the church. Fluorescent lights, folding tables, cots lined up in rows like a field hospital. The air smelled like instant coffee, an industrial cleaner, and too many bodies in too small a space. Children sat on the floor coloring with broken crayons. A woman near the entrance was arguing quietly with a volunteer about blanket allocation. Wesley scanned the room. It didn't take long to find her. Yolanda Jefferson sat in the far corner, not on a cot, on the floor, her back against the cinder block wall. Kezia slept beside her, curled under a thin blanket with her school backpack tucked beneath her head like a pillow. Darnell was asleep too, his head on his mother's thigh, his small fingers wrapped around the zipper of a jacket that wasn't warm enough for February. Yolanda wasn't sleeping. She was writing. A pen in one hand, a crumpled sheet of paper on her knee. Wesley watched her for a moment before approaching. She was filling out a job application. By hand. Because she didn't have a computer. Because she didn't have a library card anymore. Because when you lose your address, you lose access to almost everything that requires one. He walked over slowly. She looked up before he got within 10 feet. Her eyes locked onto him with the precision of someone who had learned to assess threats quickly. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just watched. "Can I help you?" she asked. Not a question. A boundary. "My name is Wesley," he said. He paused. The last name stayed in his throat. "I heard about what happened to you on the news. I wanted to see if there's anything I could do." Yolanda's expression didn't change. She'd heard this before. The volunteers, the church members, the well-meaning strangers who showed up with sympathy and left with a clean conscience. "I don't need your pity," she said. Her voice was steady. Not angry, not grateful, just clear. "I need a job. I need a door that locks. I need my kids to stop sleeping on gym mats. Can you do any of that?" Wesley opened his mouth, closed it. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him without deference, without calculation, without wanting something from him in return. Yolanda wasn't asking for charity. She was issuing a challenge. "Meet me where I actually am, or leave." "I might be able to help with some of that," Wesley said carefully. "If you'll let me." Yolanda studied him. Her eyes moved from his shoes to his watch to his hands. She was reading him the way he read balance sheets. Quickly, accurately, without sentiment. "Everybody wants to help," she said quietly. "Nobody wants to fix anything. People hand you a sandwich and feel like heroes. But nobody asks why a woman who worked 5 years of night shifts is sitting on a church floor with her kids. Nobody asks how the system broke her. They just want the version of the story where they showed up and made it better." Wesley felt that land somewhere deep. Not in his pride. In his guilt. Because she had just described exactly what he'd walked in planning to do. "You're right," he said. "I'm not here to hand you a sandwich." "Then what are you here for?" He didn't have a clean answer, not yet. So he told the only truth available. "I'm here because I saw your son ask if you were camping, and I haven't been able to close my eyes since." Something shifted in Yolanda's face. Not trust, not softness, but the faintest crack in the wall she'd built around herself. The acknowledgement that this stranger had seen the one moment she had tried hardest to hide. She didn't invite him to sit. She didn't thank him. She just looked at him for a long time, then went back to writing her application. Wesley stood there, awkward, useless. A billionaire in a church basement who had no idea what to do with his hands. Yolanda Jefferson didn't look broken. She looked exhausted, which was worse, because broken people stop. Exhausted people keep going until they collapse. Yolanda didn't tell her story all at once. It came out in pieces over the days that followed. A sentence here while Kezia colored at the shelter table. A memory there while Darnell napped on her lap. Not because she was hiding anything, but because telling your whole story at once requires a kind of energy that homelessness steals from you in the first week and never gives back. She grew up in West Philadelphia, 52nd and Walnut. A row house with 3 bedrooms and a front porch where her mother hung wind chimes made from old spoons. Her mother Gwendolyn cleaned houses for wealthy families in Chestnut Hill, 6 days a week, hands raw from bleach, knees worn from scrubbing floors that weren't hers. Her father left when Yolanda was 7. No note, no phone call, just an empty closet and a silence that filled the house like smoke. Gwendolyn raised Yolanda alone, worked doubles when the bills got heavy, never complained, never asked for help, taught her daughter one thing above everything else. You work, you pay your way, you don't owe anybody and nobody owes you. Yolanda graduated high school, didn't have money for college, got her certified nursing assistant license at 20, started working at a community hospital in North Philadelphia, night shifts, 12 hours. 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. The pay wasn't much, $14.60 an hour, but it was steady. It was honest. It was hers. She met Terrell when she was 25, construction worker, big hands, quiet voice, the kind of man who fixed things without being asked and never took credit. They had Kezia a year later. Darnell came 4 years after that. They weren't married. They didn't need a paper to know what they were. They were a family, stable, functional, real. Then Terrell fell from scaffolding on a job site in Camden, New Jersey. 3 stories. He died before the ambulance arrived. He was 31 years old, no life insurance, no workers' compensation because the contractor had classified him as independent, no savings beyond 2 months of rent because every dollar they earned went to keeping the family fed and housed and clothed and alive. Yolanda was 31 with 2 children and a grief so heavy it bent her spine. But she didn't stop. Couldn't. There was no one else. Her mother had passed 2 years before Terrell. No siblings, no cousins nearby. No safety net except her own 2 hands and the job that paid $14.60 an hour. She managed. For 2 years she managed. Night shifts at the hospital. Mrs. Harmon watched the kids while Yolanda worked. Yolanda checked on Mrs. Harmon every morning when she got home. A quiet exchange of survival between 2 women who understood that in this world, sometimes all you have is the person across the hall. Then the hospital cut its budget. 40% of the nursing assistant staff, gone. September. Yolanda got the letter on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, she was filling out applications. By the end of the month, she had submitted 12. By the end of October, 26. By the end of December, 47. 3 interviews, 3 rejections. The same question every time, spoken or unspoken. Can you work nights, weekends, holidays? Do you have childcare? The answer was always complicated. Because childcare in America costs an average of $1,100 a month. Almost exactly what Yolanda's rent was. You can't pay for childcare without a job, and you can't get a job without childcare. That's not a paradox. That's a trap, and millions of single mothers are caught in it right now today. While you're watching this, in the United States, 40% of Americans don't have $400 saved for an emergency. 40%. That means for nearly half the country, 1 job loss, 1 medical bill, 1 car repair, is the difference between stability and freefall. Yolanda had exactly 2 months of savings when she lost her job. 60 days of breathing room. That's all that separated her from the sidewalk. The savings ran out in November. Rent was due. She didn't have it. She called Pinnacle. No answer. She called again and again. She sold the television first. Got $80 for a TV that cost $300. Then she sold her bed frame. Slept on the floor so Kezia and Darnell could keep theirs. Then, she sold her old phone. $45. Then, the microwave. $20. Each thing she sold was a piece of the life she'd built with Terrell. Each receipt was a small funeral for a version of herself she was losing one object at a time. But she never sold the kids' things. Never sold Kezia's books. Never sold Darnell's toy trucks. Because those were the only evidence her children had that childhood still existed. December came. Rent due again. Nothing left to sell. She walked into Pinnacle's office on Broad Street and sat in the lobby for 2 hours. Nobody came out. She left a handwritten note explaining her situation. Work history, payment record, the layoff, the applications. Everything laid bare on a single sheet of paper. Nobody responded. And then something happened that Wesley would carry with him for the rest of his life. Kezia, 9 years old, started hiding food at school. Crackers from the cafeteria slipped into her backpack when no one was looking. Granola bars tucked into her coat pocket. A juice box saved from lunch and brought home for Darnell, a 9-year-old who had learned that love meant smuggling crackers. A child who understood that her brother was hungry before her mother could figure out how to say it. A girl whose childhood had been replaced by a responsibility no child should carry and no parent should have to witness. Yolanda found the crackers one evening, crumbled at the bottom of Kezia's backpack. She sat on the kitchen floor of the apartment she was about to lose and pressed her hands over her mouth so her children wouldn't hear her cry. Wesley visited the shelter 3 more times that week. He brought groceries, a warm coat for Darnell, new shoes for Kezia because her old ones had a hole in the left sole that she'd been stuffing with napkins. He didn't announce himself, didn't make speeches, just showed up, left things, sat with the children while Yolanda filled out applications. Kezia warmed up to him first. She showed him her drawings. Butterflies mostly. Butterflies and houses. Always houses. Every picture had a house in it somewhere. A square with a triangle on top and a door with a handle. The most basic architecture of safety, drawn over and over by a child who no longer had one. Darnell was shyer. But on the 3rd visit, he climbed onto the bench next to Wesley and handed him a broken crayon. "You can have the blue one," he said. "Blue is for the sky." Wesley took the crayon. His hand was shaking. He didn't know why a 5-year-old, handing him a broken crayon, felt heavier than signing a $200 million acquisition. But it did. Yolanda watched all of this with careful eyes. She was beginning to trust him. Not fully, not freely, but the way you trust a bridge that looks sturdy enough to hold you for one more crossing. She let him sit, let him help, let him exist in the margins of her crisis, without demanding he explain himself further. Then one afternoon, the television in the shelter's common area was tuned to a business news channel, a segment about commercial real estate, a name on the screen, Foster Meridian Properties, and a face she recognized. Wesley Foster, CEO, Billionaire, owner of 14,000 residential units across 6 cities. Yolanda stared at the screen. The camera showed a building, then another, then a graphic listing the company's portfolio, Philadelphia Properties, Kensington Avenue. She felt her blood go cold. Not cold like winter. Cold like betrayal. The kind of cold that starts in your stomach and spreads outward until your fingers go numb and your jaw locks, and every word you've ever said to the person standing in front of you replays with a new sickening meaning. Wesley arrived at the shelter that evening carrying a bag of groceries and a children's book he'd bought for Darnell. He walked through the door the way he'd been walking through it all week. Carefully, quietly, like a man trying to earn a space he hadn't yet been given. Yolanda was standing near the entrance, arms crossed, face still. The kind of stillness that doesn't mean calm. It means a storm has already formed and is choosing the exact moment to land. "You're him," she said. Wesley stopped. "You own that building. 1847 Kensington. You own it." He set the bag down slowly. "Yes, you're the reason my kids are sleeping on gym mats. You, not some faceless company, not some system. You." Wesley didn't step back, didn't look away, Didn't reach for an excuse or a justification or any of the 1,000 deflections his lawyers had trained him to deploy. Yes, I own the building. I didn't know what was happening inside it. He paused. But that's not an excuse. That's the problem. Yolanda's voice dropped. Quiet now. And the quiet was worse than shouting. You came here to feel better about yourself. You wanted to play hero so you could sleep at night. Bring groceries. Buy shoes. Go home and tell yourself you're one of the good ones. Each word hit like a stone dropped from a height. Precise, heavy, deserved. You wanted to be the savior of your own guilt, she said. I've seen men like you my whole life. You break something, and then you show up with flowers. Wesley stood in the middle of that shelter, surrounded by cots and broken crayons, and the smell of industrial soap, and he absorbed every word she threw at him. Not because he was strong, because she was right. Maybe, he said. Maybe that's exactly what I did. Maybe I came here because watching that news report made me feel something I haven't felt in 20 years, and I didn't know what to do with it except show up. He took a breath. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until I fix what I broke. Not because it makes me good, because it makes me responsible. Yolanda stared at him, her jaw tight, her eyes dry. She had cried enough in the last 3 months to last a lifetime. She wasn't going to waste another tear on a billionaire's guilt. She turned and walked away. Didn't say another word. Just walked back to her corner, where Kezia and Darnell were sitting on a cot. But Kezia had been watching. Those 9-year-old eyes that had seen too much. She looked at Wesley from across the room, and the question she asked traveled 15 feet through the shelter air and landed on his chest like a fist. Are you the man who took our home? Wesley couldn't answer. His throat closed, his eyes burned. He stood there in a church basement holding a children's book and a bag of groceries and realized that a 9-year-old had just asked him the only question that mattered. If this story is making you feel something, take a second to subscribe, because what happens next changes everything. Let's continue. Wesley left the shelter that night and drove to his hotel in Center City. A suite on the 14th floor. King bed, marble bathroom, room service menu on the nightstand. He sat on the edge of the bed and didn't move for a long time. Then he opened his laptop, not to check email, not to review reports. He logged into the Foster Meridian Master System and began pulling data he had never once looked at in 20 years of ownership. Eviction filings. All properties. All cities. Last 12 months. The number loaded on the screen. 847. 847 families evicted from Foster Meridian properties in a single year. He clicked deeper. Household composition of evicted tenants. 63% were single-parent households, more than 6 out of 10. Mothers and fathers trying to raise children alone, and his system had put them on the street. He kept clicking. Time from first missed payment to eviction execution. 41% were evicted within 60 days of their first late payment. 2 months. The same timeline as Yolanda. Average tenancy of evicted renters before the missed payment. 3.2 years. These weren't people who moved in and stopped paying. These were people who had lived in his buildings for years, paid faithfully, and then hit one bad stretch that the system refused to forgive. His father's voice rose from the place it always lived. That quiet shelf in the back of his skull where Aldridge Foster's lessons sat like commandments carved in stone. The numbers work, son. That's all that matters. You can't run a business on feelings. Wesley stared at the screen. 847. He said the number out loud in the empty hotel room, and the sound of it echoed off walls that cost $400 a night to sleep between. No, he said, and his voice sounded different. Harder, clearer, like a man pulling a knife out of his own chest. The numbers worked for me. They destroyed everyone else. Wesley Foster had spent 20 years believing he was building wealth. He was building wreckage. The only difference between him and a storm was that he sent invoices. He picked up his phone, 217A. He called his COO, Derek Langston, in Chicago. Derek answered on the 4th ring. Groggy, confused. Wesley, it's 2 in the morning. What's freeze every eviction in the portfolio? effective immediately. Silence on the line. Then Derek's voice suddenly wide awake. Wesley, that's 14,000 units, across 6 cities. Do you have any idea what the legal liability? I said, freeze them, every single one. No new filings, no pending executions. Nothing moves until I say so. The board is going to... The board answers to me. And right now I'm telling you that not one more family gets put on the street by our company until I have personally reviewed how we got here. Is that clear? Derek paused. Crystal. Wesley hung up. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a long time. Somewhere in this city, Yolanda Jefferson was lying on a gym mat. Her children pressed against her sides, wondering whether the man who had taken her home was also the man trying to give it back. And somewhere in his chest, in the place where his father's voice used to live, there was silence. Not peace, not yet, but silence. And silence after 20 years of the wrong voice telling you the wrong things was the first step toward hearing something true. 3 days passed before Yolanda called. Wesley had gone back to the shelter twice. Both times Yolanda refused to see him. He didn't push. He left an envelope with a volunteer and asked that it be given to her when she was ready. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apology, no speech, just information. A 2-bedroom apartment. Unit 409. Same building. 1847 Kensington Avenue. Fully renovated. New heating system. New locks, new paint. Furnished with basic essentials. Rent-free for 6 months. After that, a graduated payment plan based on income, never more than 30% of whatever she earned. No late fees, no penalties, no pinnacle. Below the apartment details was a second section, a job placement program at Temple University Hospital, CNA positions available, flexible scheduling for parents, on-site childcare subsidy, an interview already arranged if she wanted it. At the bottom of the page, one handwritten line. This isn't charity, this is what was owed. Yolanda called on a Tuesday evening. Wesley answered before the first ring finished. I'm doing this for Kezia and Darnell, she said. No greeting, no small talk. Her voice flat and deliberate. Not for you. Not because I forgive you, not because I believe you. I'm doing this because my daughter is hiding crackers in her backpack and my son doesn't know what a bed feels like anymore. That's the only reason. I know, Wesley said. And I wouldn't trust you if you forgave me this easily. Silence on the line. A long one. Then Yolanda spoke again, quieter this time. When can we see it? Tomorrow. Whenever you're ready. The renovation had taken 72 hours. Wesley had brought in a crew of 12. New drywall where the old plaster was crumbling. A heating unit that actually worked. Windows that sealed properly. A kitchen faucet that didn't drip. New locks on every door. Deadbolt and chain. Because when you've lost your home once, the first thing you need isn't furniture. It's the sound of a lock clicking shut behind you. The apartment was simple. Not luxury. Laminate countertops. Basic carpet. A couch from a warehouse store. A kitchen table with 4 chairs. But it was clean. It was warm. And it was safe. Kezia walked in first. She moved through the apartment, slowly touching everything. The walls, the light switches, the refrigerator door. She opened it and closed it 3 times. Then she walked into the smaller bedroom and stopped. A twin bed with a purple comforter, a small desk with a lamp, a bookshelf empty waiting to be filled. Mama, she said, is this my room? Yes, baby, just mine, just yours. Kezia sat on the bed, pressed her hand flat against the comforter. Then she lay back and stared at the ceiling like she was memorizing it, like she needed proof that it would still be there when she closed her eyes. Darnell ran in a minute later. He found the second bedroom, a small bed with a blue blanket, a plastic bin of building blocks in the corner. He climbed onto the mattress and bounced once, twice. Then he looked at Yolanda with those wide 5-year-old eyes. Mama, is this our home for real? Or are we just visiting? Wesley was standing in the hallway. He heard the question and had to turn away. A 5-year-old boy who had lost the concept of home so completely that he couldn't tell the difference between living somewhere and passing through. A child who had learned that everything could be taken at any moment, so he'd stopped believing anything could stay. Yolanda knelt down and held Darnell's face in both her hands. "This is our home, baby. For real. We're staying." Darnell looked at her, searched her face for the truth, the way children do, not with logic, but with instinct. Then he nodded, slowly, like he wanted to believe her, but wasn't quite ready to let go of the caution that had kept him safe. Yolanda stood up and walked to the living room window. She looked out at the small playground behind the building. Rusted swings, a basketball hoop with no net, nothing fancy, but outside, in the air, with sunlight. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood there and breathed. In and out, slowly, like someone remembering how to fill their lungs without calculating whether they could afford to exhale. For the first time in 4 months, Yolanda Jefferson took a breath that didn't carry the weight of tomorrow. And that single breath, quiet and ordinary and invisible to everyone except the woman taking it, was worth more than every dollar in Wesley Foster's empire. Wesley didn't just fix one apartment, he dismantled the machine. The first call he made when he got back to Chicago was to Pinnacle Property Group's corporate office. Not to negotiate, not to renegotiate terms, to terminate. Effective immediately. Every property, every city, every contract. His legal team pushed back. His COO pushed back. His CFO sent a 12-page memo outlining the financial risk of severing ties with the largest third-party property management firm in their portfolio. Wesley read the memo. Then he read Yolanda's tenant file again. 58 months of on-time payments. 11 unanswered calls. 6 weeks, from stable to homeless. He chose the tenant file. In place of Pinnacle, Wesley built something new. An in-house property management division with a single rule that overrode every other policy in the handbook. Before any eviction filing could be submitted, 3 conditions had to be met. First, a minimum of 3 direct in-person contact attempts with the tenant. Not emails, not automated texts. A human being knocking on a door and asking what happened. Second, a free financial counseling session offered to every tenant who fell behind. Not mandatory, just available. Third, a 30-day review period where a tenant advocate, not a lawyer, not a property manager, but someone whose job was to represent the renter, would assess whether the situation was temporary or permanent. 3 steps. That's all it took. 3 steps that Pinnacle had never taken because 3 steps cost time and time cost money, and money was the only language the old system spoke. Wesley hired tenant advocates for every building in the portfolio, 1 per property. Their job was simple. Stand between management and the people living inside the walls. Listen, translate, protect. Not protect the asset, protect the human. He created an emergency hardship fund. Any tenant who could demonstrate sudden income loss, a layoff letter, a medical bill, a death in the family could apply for a 90-day grace period. No late fees, no penalties, no eviction proceedings, just time. Because what Wesley had learned from Yolanda, what her 11 unanswered phone calls had taught him, was that most people who fall behind on rent don't need charity. They need time. 60 days, 90 days. Enough room to find new footing before the ground disappears entirely. A handful of cities across America have already figured this out. In places like Kansas City, Philadelphia, and Cleveland, pilot programs now guarantee tenants the right to a free lawyer when facing eviction. It's called right to counsel. And the results aren't subtle. In cities where tenants have legal representation, eviction rates have dropped by as much as 70%. Not because the tenants suddenly had more money, but because when someone actually looks at the case, when someone asks questions and demands documentation and challenges the process, most evictions fall apart. They were never about justice. They were about speed. Wesley couldn't change national policy, but he could change 14,000 doors. 6 months after the overhaul, the numbers came in. Eviction filings across the entire Foster Meridian portfolio had dropped by 78%. Tenant retention had increased by 34%. Revenue dipped 3% in the short term. But the costs that nobody ever talked about, the costs of turnover, the renovation between tenants, the legal fees, the court filings, the lost rent during vacancy, the advertising for new renters, all of that dropped by 41%. The math was clear. Keeping people in their homes was cheaper than throwing them out. Wesley sat in his Chicago office, looking at the quarterly report, a spreadsheet, numbers, the same language he'd spoken his entire career. But for the first time, the numbers told a story he was proud of. Not just profit, but proof. Proof that decency and efficiency were not enemies. Proof that his father's philosophy, the one that said sentiment was a luxury, had been wrong not just morally, but mathematically. Compassion, it turned out, wasn't just moral, it was mathematical. His father had been wrong about that too. Yolanda started at Temple University Hospital on a Monday in March. Night shift, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. The same hours she'd worked for 5 years before. The same scrubs. The same sore feet by 3 a.m. The same fluorescent lights and beeping monitors and patients who needed someone to show up when no one else would. But everything else was different. This time, when she left for work, Kezia and Darnell weren't being watched by a neighbor doing a favor. They were enrolled in an after-school program at their elementary school. Structured, supervised, funded in part by the same foundation Wesley had quietly set up to support working parents in his buildings. Kezia did homework at a real desk. Darnell built towers out of wooden blocks and knocked them down laughing. This time, when Yolanda came home at 8:30 in the morning, she didn't collapse onto a bare floor. She walked into an apartment that was hers, a door that locked, a refrigerator with food, heat that worked. She didn't celebrate. She went to work. That's what Yolanda Jefferson did. She worked. Within 2 months, she'd been moved from the overnight float pool to a permanent position on the medical surgical unit. Her supervisor noted her patient scores were among the highest on the floor. Not because she was trying to impress anyone, because she knew what it felt like to be in a bed scared with no one answering your calls. She treated every patient the way she wished Pinnacle had treated her. Like a person, not a number. Then, she did something that made Wesley go quiet when she told him. She enrolled in the licensed practical nurse program. Online classes through a community college, tuition partially covered by a workforce development grant. The rest, she paid herself $50 a month, pulled from a paycheck that didn't have $50 of room in it. But she found it anyway, because Yolanda Jefferson had never once in her life waited for someone to hand her a future. She studied after the kids went to sleep. Every night, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Sometimes later. Textbooks open on the kitchen table. Flashcards spread across the counter. Anatomy. Pharmacology, patient assessment. Her handwriting filled notebook after notebook in tight, careful letters. One morning Wesley came by to drop off books for Kezia. He found a sticky note on the kitchen table, pink paper, crayon handwriting, letters crooked and misspelled in the way only a 9-year-old can make beautiful. "You can do it, Mama. I love you, Kezia." Yolanda had saved it. Taped it to the wall above her study area, like a diploma she hadn't earned yet, but was working toward every single night. Wesley visited once a month. Not announced, not formal. He'd bring books for Kezia, who was devouring everything she could find about marine biology. Building sets for Darnell, who had decided he wanted to be an architect, though he pronounced it architect. And for Yolanda, he brought the only thing that mattered, consistency. He showed up. He didn't disappear. He didn't lose interest. He didn't move on to the next cause or the next headline or the next version of guilt relief. He showed up, month after month, not as a savior, not as a landlord, just as someone who had broken something and was still standing in the wreckage helping clean it up. One evening, 7 months after Yolanda had moved back in, they sat at her kitchen table while Kezia read on the couch and Darnell slept in his room. Yolanda poured coffee into mismatched mugs and looked at Wesley for a long time before she spoke. "I still don't fully forgive you," she said. "Maybe I never will. What happened to us, what your company did, it changed my children. Kezia still hides food sometimes. Darnell still asks me every morning if we're staying. That doesn't go away, because the heat works now, Wesley nodded. He didn't argue, didn't explain, just listened. But I respect that you stayed, Yolanda said. Most people who feel guilty just write a check and disappear. You stayed. That counts for something. Not everything, but something. Wesley looked at the sticky note on the wall, Kezia's crooked handwriting. A child's love spelled out in crayon. And he thought about his father's penthouse, the art on the walls worth millions, the wine cellar, the marble, the glass. None of it had ever said anything as true as that pink sticky note. Thank you, he said, and he meant it more than he'd ever meant those two words in his life. Not thank you for forgiving me, because she hadn't. Thank you for letting me stay. Yolanda's story isn't rare. That's the part that should keep you up at night. It's not an outlier. It's not an exception. It's America's most invisible crisis happening every single day in every single city, and most of us never see it because the people it happens to don't make the news. Every year, 3.6 million eviction cases are filed in the United States. 3.6 million. That's not a number, that's a population. That's more people than live in the entire city of Chicago. And behind every filing is a family. A mother packing garbage bags at 6 in the morning. A child asking if they're camping. A father choosing between rent and medication. Real people making impossible choices inside a system that offers no mercy and even less time. 1 in 4 American renters spends more than half their income on housing. Half. That means a single missed paycheck, a single medical emergency, a single car repair can push a family from stable to evicted in less than 60 days. And once the eviction is filed, the cascade begins. You lose your address. That means your children lose their school enrollment. You lose your school enrollment, and childcare falls apart. Childcare falls apart, and you can't work the hours your job requires. You lose your job, you lose your income. Your credit score drops because the eviction stays on your record for 7 years. And with a damaged credit score, no landlord will approve your next application, so you end up in a shelter, or a car, or on a sidewalk in February with everything you own in garbage bags. It's not a single failure, it's a chain reaction, and it starts with a door closing behind you. The impact falls heaviest on those who can least afford it. Black women are evicted at twice the rate of white women. Children who experience eviction are 4 times more likely to be hospitalized and twice as likely to drop out of school. The trauma doesn't end when the family finds a new place. It lives in the body, in the way a child flinches when someone knocks on the door, in the way a mother checks the mailbox with her heart in her throat every first of the month. But here's what the data also shows. Solutions exist. Emergency rental assistance programs, the kind that give families a few $100s to bridge a gap, prevent homelessness at a fraction of the cost of shelter beds, and emergency services. Right to counsel programs, where tenants get free legal representation, reduce successful evictions by up to 70%. Mediation programs, where landlords and tenants sit across a table and actually talk, resolve disputes before they ever reach a courtroom. None of these are radical ideas. None of them require reinventing the system. They just require someone deciding that the people inside the buildings matter as much as the buildings themselves. Wesley couldn't fix a national crisis. He knew that. One man with one portfolio couldn't undo decades of policy failure and structural inequality, and a housing market designed to extract maximum profit from people with minimum options. But he could fix his 14,000 doors. He could change the way his system treated the human beings who called his buildings home. And Yolanda Jefferson, a woman who had hidden crackers in her daughter's backpack and slept on a gym mat and called a management company 11 times without a single answer, had shown him exactly where to start. 18 months later, Wesley Foster stood at a podium inside a building he almost didn't recognize. 1847 Kensington Avenue. Same address, same brick, same 5 stories. But everything else had changed. The front door had a working lock. The hallway lights were on. The walls had been replastered and painted a warm gray, that made the space feel like somewhere people lived, not somewhere people survived. The elevator worked. The fire escapes had been repaired. And on the ground floor, where a storage closet used to collect mildew and broken furniture, there was now a community room with folding chairs and a small stage and windows that let in actual daylight. The room was full. Tenants from the building, social workers from 3 organizations, legal aid attorneys, housing advocates, reporters from 2 Philadelphia stations and 1 national outlet, city council members who had suddenly become very interested in tenant protections now that a billionaire was funding them. Wesley had announced the launch of the Open Door Initiative, a foundation dedicated to 3 things: emergency housing assistance for families facing eviction, free legal representation for tenants in housing court, and a training program for tenant advocates, people whose entire job was to stand between property management and the human beings living behind the doors. Not charity. Infrastructure. Not a gift. A correction. Yolanda sat in the front row. She wore a simple navy blue dress she'd bought with her own paycheck from Temple University Hospital, where she now worked as a licensed practical nurse. Her LPN certificate was 3 weeks old. She'd passed on her first attempt. Kezia sat beside her, in a yellow dress with her hair braided, holding her mother's hand with the quiet confidence of a child who had finally stopped waiting for the floor to disappear. Darnell sat on the other side, holding a piece of paper. A drawing. Crayons on white printer paper. A building, 5 stories, square windows, a door with a handle, and above the building, a sun with rays that stretched to every corner of the page. Wesley looked out at the room and spoke without notes. "I stood in this hallway a year and a half ago," he said, "and I didn't recognize my own building. Not because it had changed, because I had never bothered to look. I owned this building for 7 years and never once walked through the front door. I never met a single tenant. I never asked if the heat worked. I never asked if anyone was safe." He paused. The room was silent. Yolanda Jefferson forced me to see what I had chosen to ignore. She didn't ask for my help. She didn't want my pity. She wanted a door that locked and a system that didn't throw her children onto a sidewalk because she missed 2 months of rent after 5 years of paying on time. That's not a lot to ask. And the fact that my company couldn't give her that is something I will carry for the rest of my life. He announced the advisory board. Community members, housing attorneys, social workers, and 1 tenant representative, Yolanda Jefferson. Yolanda walked to the podium. She didn't have a speech. She hadn't prepared remarks or rehearsed in a mirror. She just stood there for a moment, looking at the room full of people who were looking back at her, and spoke. "I'm not here because I'm special," she said. Her voice was steady, clear. The voice of a woman who had slept on a gym mat and kept filling out job applications by hand. "I'm here because 3.6 million families go through what I went through every single year. I'm just the one who ended up on TV." She looked at Wesley, then at Kezia, then back at the room. Nobody should lose their home because they lost their job for 2 months. Nobody. And if this foundation means that even one mother doesn't have to explain to her 5-year-old son why they're sleeping in a church basement, then it's worth everything. She stepped down. No applause line. No dramatic exit. She just walked back to her seat and held her daughter's hand. After the event, the reporters left. The council members shook hands and disappeared into black cars. The tenants lingered, talking to the advocates, picking up pamphlets, asking questions about the legal aid program. Wesley stood near the entrance, watching the room empty slowly. Kezia appeared at his side. She tugged on his sleeve the way she always did, gently, like she was asking permission to exist in his space. "Mr. Wesley." "Yeah, Kezia. My mom said you used to own the building that kicked us out." Wesley looked down at her. 11 years old now, taller, sharper, still carrying that backpack everywhere she went, still drawing houses in every notebook. "I did," he said. "But now you're fixing it." "I'm trying." Kezia nodded, thought about it, then looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much and still chose to believe. "Good. Because there's a girl in my class who just lost her apartment too. Her name is Brianna. She's been staying with her grandma, but her grandma's apartment is really small. Can you help her?" Wesley's throat tightened. Because this was it. This was the whole point. Not the foundation, not the press conference, not the advisory board, or the policy changes, or the spreadsheets showing reduced eviction rates. A child standing in a hallway, asking a grown man to help her friend, the simplest, most human version of the question he should have been asking for 20 years. Can you help? Tell me about Brianna, Wesley said, and we'll figure it out. The crisis hadn't ended. It hadn't even slowed down. Somewhere in America right now, a family was being evicted. A mother was packing garbage bags. A child was asking questions that no child should have to ask. But one man had finally stopped looking away. And one mother had shown him that the people inside his buildings were never just leases. They were lives. Months later, Wesley sat in the same penthouse. Same table, same chair, same view of Lake Michigan stretching into darkness. The television was on, same channel, same news anchor. Even the same time of evening, that quiet hour when dinner is done and the world narrows down to whatever glows on the screen. But the story was different. A reporter stood outside a building in Philadelphia, 1847 Kensington Avenue. But the building behind her wasn't the one Wesley remembered from that February night. The brick had been cleaned. The windows were whole. The fire escapes had been painted. And behind the reporter on the small playground out back, children were playing. Actually playing. Running and shouting and doing the things children do when they feel safe enough to be loud. The reporter was doing a segment on the Open Door Initiative. 6 months since launch. 214 families assisted. 87 evictions prevented through legal aid alone. A model that 3 other property companies had quietly begun studying. And then the camera cut to an interview. A woman in hospital scrubs. Clean. Professional. Standing in front of the building with her arms at her sides and her chin lifted, and the kind of calm in her eyes that only comes from having survived something that should have destroyed you and building something better on the other side. Of it, Yolanda Jefferson. Licensed practical nurse, tenant advocate, advisory board member, mother of 2. Nobody should lose their home because they lost their job for 2 months, she said into the camera. Nobody. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly the way it was designed to work. We just need to redesign it. Wesley watched her speak. He watched the building behind her. He watched the children on the swings. And something shifted in his chest. Not a crack this time. Not a fracture. Something settling. Something finding its right place for the first time. He picked up the remote. Pressed the button. The screen went black. But this time, he didn't turn off the TV because the image was unbearable. He turned it off because he was smiling. Because for the first time in his life, what was on the news had something to do with him in a way that didn't require lawyers or spin or damage control. Just truth. Just change. Just proof that one decision made on one night in one penthouse could ripple outward until it reached a playground where children were safe enough to be loud. He sat in the silence. The penthouse was still large, still mostly empty. The dining table still seated 14. The wine cellar still held its bottles. The lake outside was still black and endless. But the silence felt different now. For 20 years his father's voice had filled these rooms. That low certain whisper that told him sentiment was weakness, tenants were numbers, and compassion was a luxury he couldn't afford. Tonight the voice was gone. Not forgotten. Wesley would never forget his father. But the recording had been overwritten. Replaced by other voices. Kezia asking, "But now you're fixing it." Yolanda saying, "I don't need your pity. I need a door that locks." Darnell asking, "Mama, is this our home for real?" Mrs. Harmon saying she didn't deserve what they did to her. None of us do. Those were the voices that lived in his walls now, and they were louder than anything Aldridge Foster had ever said. Wesley Foster had built an empire that made people invisible. It took one woman on a news screen to make him see. The eviction he'd watched on TV that February night wasn't just a story, it was a mirror. And for the first time in his life, he didn't look away. He thought he'd been watching someone else's crisis. He'd been watching his own failure. And the moment he recognized the address, it wasn't just his building, It was his responsibility. It had always been. The screen was dark. The penthouse was quiet. Somewhere in Philadelphia, Yolanda Jefferson was putting her children to bed in an apartment with a lock on the door, and heat that worked, and walls that didn't let the wind in. Somewhere in that same building, Mrs. Harmon was asleep in a unit with a fixed radiator and a ceiling that no longer leaked. And somewhere in a classroom, a girl named Kezia was drawing another house. Square walls, triangle roof, door with a handle, sun in the corner, always a sun. Now, before you go, I want to be honest with you for a moment. This story is fictional. Wesley Foster and Yolanda Jefferson aren't real people. I made them up. The names, the buildings, the conversations, none of it happened exactly the way I told it. But the crisis is real. Every number I mentioned in this video is documented. The 3.6 million eviction filings per year come from Princeton University's Eviction Lab, one of the most comprehensive research projects on housing instability in America. The racial disparities, the impact on children, the 60-day spiral from stable to homeless, all of that is real. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition tracks it. The data is public. You can look it up tonight. I wrote this story because I believe the way we talk about poverty matters. We say, people lost their home like they misplaced it somewhere, like it slipped behind the couch. They didn't lose it. Systems failed them. Landlords looked away. Management companies pressed a button. And the rest of us changed the channel. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is where change begins. Not policy papers, not statistics, not speeches at conferences. Discomfort. The kind that sits in your chest after you hear a 5-year-old ask his mother if they're camping. The kind that makes you wonder how many Yolandas live in your city right now tonight, filling out job applications by hand on a shelter floor. If you or someone you know is facing eviction, call 211. It's a national hotline that connects you to local housing resources, emergency rental assistance, and legal aid. Most states have legal aid societies that offer free representation for tenants in housing court. You don't have to face it alone, and you don't have to figure it out without help. The system is hard, but there are people fighting to make it less hard, and knowing they exist is the first step. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story hit you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for the algorithm, for the conversation. Because the more we talk about this, the harder it becomes to look away. See you in the next one.